Welcome to episode 68. Can you believe it? Such a wonderful day outside here in Indiana right now. Episode 68, there's a new horizon, and for higher education, make that 3 horizons. We've got 3 guests who were involved in the recent Horizons report from EDUCAUSE. And they were asked to write implication essays for it, right in the middle, in terms of Turkey with my friend Aras Bozkurt from Anadolu University. Hello, my friend. And all the way in the down under with John Mason at Charles Darwin University. It's after midnight there, so I want to thank him for staying up with us and not having bags under his eyes. And and then Laura coming to us from Cape Town, University of Cape Town, where she's the founding director of innovations in learning and teaching or something in that regard, and is very involved in digital scholarship on that campus and around the world as a thought leader in digital scholarship and on open educational resources. There's many areas Laura's been a thought leader, and you might find her at keynoting a conference somewhere. But I noticed I didn't pronounce her last name because I can't.
I noticed.
Can you help us out with that? Could you? Yeah.
It's Czerniewicz, Laura Czerniewicz.
Thank you, Laura. And so John, by the way, is adjunct with East China Normal University, which is one of the sponsors of this show, and also with the Korean National Open University, KNOU. I think Aras is adjunct at another place. What other university are you at, Aras?
Anadolu University.
And you're also affiliated with a second one, I think, right?
Oh, UNISA.
And where is
University
that?
of South Africa.
In South Africa.
South
Okay,
Africa,
so there's the connection and link. I thought so. And so this Horizons report has been very influential on all of us. We've been chatting about it before the show. And the new one, or the last 2, in fact, have had special inserts. They've tried to make it more personalized, maybe, and maybe more targeted, and having implication essays in this one. And 3 of the 5 authors of those implications essays are with us here today. So we'll start with those implication essays before we get into their respective research and careers and scholarships. And so ladies first, I guess. Laura, could you maybe tell us about how one gets involved in writing an implication essay and what yours entailed? What did you write that got them interested and curious?
I think in the past, the Horizon report, before it was with EDUCAUSE, was an invitation only event. And I think there was criticism for that. And I also think that previously there was criticism for the global North orientation. And what we've seen in the last few years is an opening up. So what EDUCAUSE has done is they've called specifically for broader stakeholder groups. They've asked people to come forward. They every year, in fact, it's been really interesting to see how there's been a conscious effort to broaden the participation. And in fact, if you look at us here today, well, I don't know, John, if Australia's in the global South or not, depends. But, you know, we have, so we have a range of people here. Yes, I know you're on mute. In terms of the implications essays, we were invited to write them. And I would imagine that we were invited to write them too, specifically as part of this orientation of what are these general trends that have been identified through quite a lengthy process with a very large reference group. What do they mean in different contexts? In terms of the South African case study, the way that I approached it was not as specific. I mean, it was about South Africa, but it was also that South Africa is an excellent exemplar of an extremely unequal society. And it's certainly not the only one. So Brazil is another case that's very similar to South Africa in terms of serious inequality, but so is the US, guys. Inequality is very serious in the US, and it's not always the first place that people think of, but if you look at the Gini coefficient and other measures. So the kinds of issues that I was pointing to in this report are not simply pertaining to South Africa, and they're around what happened when the pandemic happened and how social inequality in terms of people's backgrounds and in terms of a massified higher education system were exposed. They're around what happened with the exposure of austerity and underfunding, public underfunding of universities. They were around data privacy and who gets most exploited. So those kinds of issues are, in a sense, they're global issues anywhere that inequality is a really serious issue. And obviously some places, Scandinavia and so on, it's less extreme than in the cases that are in South Africa. So that's really what I try to focus on. I mean, it wasn't a having to, it's the issues that surface that one has to talk about. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm sure we'll come back to some of these issues.
Well, some people might want to download this report who are watching in the YouTube channel. If you go to the blog post on this session, there's a link to the report. So you can just download it right there. And if you have questions about it, by all means, put your questions about the report in the chat, in the YouTube channel. We'll bring those questions up. They're all here to answer them. You know, that's why we brought them here. So please, please do. I think we should go over to your nearby time zone partner. Aras is the closest in time zone, 1 hour away, 1 hour later there in Turkey. So do you want to give us a little bit of overview of how you got involved and what's in the report that relates to Turkey?
Like Laura, I was also invited, and I think the participation to Horizon report is based on invitations. I mean, there isn't any channel to apply to be a part of it. And this is the case for the Delphi expert panel. Also for the implication section, while we were writing about our ideas, thoughts, and impressions regarding the recent developments, I got also another invitation to write this section, and I gladly accepted it because actually I've been following Horizon Report series from the beginning. I think it was 2004, the first version of the Horizon Report. And even as a master and PhD student, you know, one of the first thing I was doing was reading these reports as soon as they are published. When it comes to the implications section on Turkish higher education, I reflected a couple of angles, but before that, I briefly want to talk about Turkish higher education because I think it is one of the unique example all around the world. In Turkey, open education has a long history, maybe 70 years, around 70 years in primary education and around 40 years in higher education. So Turkish society is used to getting their education through open education. Another fact is that Turkey has around a total of 84 million population, and nearly 33% of this population from primary education to higher education are students. That means, you know, 33 individuals you see on the streets are students. I think that's a lot. And 10% of this population attending higher education, and 5% of higher education population is attending open education systems. Earlier, there were just one university, it was Anadolu University, which was delivering education through open education, but now there are 3 more open universities, all in dual mode and all publicly funded. What I reflected in my section is actually one of the things I explained was the openness culture in Turkey. As I told you, in the background information, I told you, actually, Turkey has a long history in open education, but when it comes to OER or OEP, the awareness is really low, because in Turkey, I think if you talk about open education or openness, people interpret this as a low quality in education. So that's really interesting. And when it comes to Turkish culture, sharing is one of our primary cultural instinct. We like sharing, we share everything. But when it comes to the educational resources, the case is different. That's why I highlighted the importance of culturally interpreting openness in terms of cultural differences. Probably, if I ask you to define openness, probably everybody would define it differently in terms of their context, like the case in Turkey. Another thing I was mentioning was digital transformation. In Turkey, digital means magical. I mean, if let's say I give a course, okay, let's say instructional design, probably there won't be a lot of demand, but if I say digital instructional design, everybody will rush to get this course. And I was talking about these issues. In Turkey, digital transformation is really a trending hot topic and supported by the government. And the infrastructure is really good. But what I was criticizing is the way we see the digital transformation. I mean, I identify technology as hard technology like computers and mobile phones, and soft technology like approaches, theories, and models. And when it comes to the soft technology section, we fail to taking advantage of digital transformation. I mean, all of our focus is hard technologies, and this is a bottleneck for Turkish higher education.
Well, Aras, we'll probably need to go to John and get his recap. I hate to cut you off there. I want to point out that Aras sat in on a dissertation 2 weeks ago of my student from Turkey who studied 35 years of distance and open education dissertations, about 191 of them. And it was pretty eye-opening, her findings. If anyone's interested in what's happening over the last 35 years in Turkey, I'm happy to send that to anyone in the audience who asks for it. Sorry to cut you off, Aras. We'll come back to you. John, you want to give us a little recap on Australia and Darwin in particular, and what you contributed to the report?
I'll do my best to be fairly quick, Curt. Thank you for that. I guess I got involved a couple of years ago when I was in China, and I'd met Christopher Brooks from EDUCAUSE, and then got involved in just communicating with him over the last few years, and got invited to participate this time around. And I thought it was a great opportunity to do this for lots of reasons. One of them being that the Horizon report seems to have really become a wonderful resource in the last couple of years, more so than in the past. A lot more depth to it. And then I thought also last year, this last 18 months, has been an extraordinary time for us to reflect on what's happening to our world. So many forces of change and so many challenges for us. And so the opportunity to participate with 50 odd other experts around the world was a great opportunity. And so following on from that, I was invited to provide an implications essay, just a short essay on the Horizon report, and I'm just reflecting now how many times we reflect on reflections. So it's an interesting process, this meta-ing of what we do all the time. And so as a meta reflection on my reflections on what it's all about, I guess from the Australian point of view, what I wanted to do in the short essay was really try to frame things from a historical perspective. I wanted to convey that in a sense, we have a phrase here describing ourselves as living in the lucky country. And so that doesn't mean we don't have the disparities that Laura was talking about before, but we have been lucky in the sense that in terms of technology and education and the like, we've been early adopters, and we've got this long history in distance education. So the challenge of the last 18 months for many institutions around the world trying to make the digital transition, that hasn't been as stark for us here in Australia. So and in terms of Darwin, I guess we are one of the luckiest places on the planet at the moment. There's been no community transmission of COVID to date, touch wood. So I do feel quite happy about that. But in terms of the content in my essay, I chose to just focus on the technological dimensions. As you know, the Horizon report, we were focusing on the 5 dimensions: social, economic, and environmental, political as well. But in my response, I thought it was useful to just focus on the technology side of things, because of course, technology has been disrupting the sector for a good few decades, and so I thought AI and micro credentials and learning analytics, all of which have been around for some years now, look to me to be positioned to go to the next level. So that's basically what I tried to focus on in my response.
I've only had one chance. I've only had one chance to talk to folks in Darwin. Unfortunately, it was virtual for a conference for incarcerated people, of all things, maybe 10 years or so ago. I want to come visit you, John, is my point.
Okay, well, you're invited, Curt.
Okay, that sounds great. And Punya is going to jump in here because he wants to be invited too. Punya?
There you go. Yes, sir. Thank you. So, for those of our listeners who may not be sort of familiar with the report and its sort of broad themes, I was wondering if each of you could, I think like Laura, for instance, your point around this whole idea of inequality as being a fundamental issue globally, maybe less so in Australia than in other places. But I think if one thing that this COVID has really demonstrated is that these existing social disparities have just become, if they were a crack, they've become a chasm, right? In terms of access, in terms of opportunity, and for development. So I think that's one theme. I was wondering from each of you, broadly about the report, what sort of stood out as being something that us as educators, as educational researchers, or the sort of community at large of educators should be thinking about from this report, not necessarily from your perspective of your essay, but what sort of stood out, what were some things, and we can go, Laura, if you want to go first, we can go with you, and then, we'll just go the same sequence. Thank you.
I'm happy to start. That's such an open-ended question. I could talk about a lot of things, but one of the things that struck me is that open education came up in this report. Again, open education has come up previously. Aras was talking about open education in Turkey. And the question that I have and that I really want to grapple with is, why is open education not getting any more traction? You think about all the money that's been poured into open education by foundations like the Hewlett Foundation and other foundations. You think about the UNESCO pledges, they're all there. And yet, if you look at this moment in time, this, as John was saying, this extraordinary 18 months, which hopefully we'll never have again, why is it that open education, which seems to have offered, Creative Commons resources, opportunities for collaboration, etc., why didn't it just not, why didn't it rise up? And, obviously that's something we all think about. And I'm just really struck by the way that big tech companies stepped in.
Yeah.
And they stepped in with their offerings, and they stepped in with their marketing speak. One is actually, after years and years and years of really arguing for access to be surfaced, I'm now suspicious when I see the word access. It's actually become a form of marketing.
Yeah. So Laura,
which is kind of scary.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I know Zhao has a new book coming out, which I think Learners Without Borders, I think its title. And again, making, I think, a similar point, not necessarily open, but to me, that really is shocking, right? I mean, here's an opportunity. The resources are out there. A lot of time and effort has gone into building them, but for some reason, there are these barriers. And I think some maybe institutional barriers about certification and degrees and so on. But I think there are also commercial barriers in terms of organizations and companies who have a cow that they're milking and don't want to necessarily let that go. So I think that's a really, really important point, because the stuff is there. I mean, it's not there. And it's just sort of heartbreaking to see that it doesn't have more. I mean, that is an opportunity, I think, to create a global learning context, right? I mean, but thank you for that. Aras?
That's a broad question, and probably my answer will be an open-ended one. I want to highlight that the Horizon report is earlier than the last two versions are different from earlier versions. The earlier ones were trying to predict the trends. Now the current Horizon report series, which are facilitated by EDUCAUSE, are trying to provide a reflection, a snapshot of recent trends and developments. When it comes to your question, actually, my answer will be a response to Laura as well. Sometimes we talk about ideals and facts, and these two things don't necessarily be at the same place all the time. When it comes to the openness, everyone knows it's a good thing. I mean, very simple. Openness is a good thing. But in the globalizing world, if you are working on openness, you cannot make profit. And in the global economy, if there isn't anything to profit, then such trends cannot attract a lot of attention. This is similar to the climate change. We all know that we have to be careful, we have to be cautious, and every year we feel that the climate is changing, but we see that countries don't take necessary precautions to lessen or stop it. What I mean, in these reports, maybe readers of these reports can pay attention to that without actually trying to predict the future. We are writing what it must be done, but it doesn't mean it will be in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. John?
Okay, so so for me, I think a few things were prominent. I actually thought the report presented a very balanced picture, and it is quite rich in the attention it gives to each of those 5 dimensions. And whichever dimension you want to look at, social, technological, economic, environmental, political, there's a big there's some big issue happening that we need to attend to at the moment. You know, whether it's nationalism and the demise of democracy and the challenge of new governance systems and what have you, climate change, you know, well-being and mental health. This last year, this last 18 months has been a real challenge to deal with, and so the way that the report has tried to put some order to that has been really quite. I thought it's been a good thing to see. So that was the first thing I wanted to emphasise. The other thing was its emphasis around not trying to predict where we're going, but to get us to think about these four possible scenarios of growth, constraint, and collapse and transformation. We're not all just buying into this transformational narrative that's been there with the digital revolution for the last 3 decades. So that's been important too. And the other thing I would like to highlight is that I think the report has got a long way to go yet. Having said all that, and we had some wonderful discussions with each of the reference group, but I think the report has a long way to go yet in becoming a truly global report. And even though we talk about the widening digital divide, the actual scale of that is really alarming to me. You know, prior to COVID, there was 260 million kids who didn't get access to school, and according to UNESCO, by mid last year, there was 1.6 billion. We have this issue of academic life, academic years lost. That's presented. There's a lot of issues that are kind of hidden underneath all of this, and I'm not sort of criticizing the report. I think the report on balance is really robust and very, very good, but it's if we dig into each of these issues, then there's lots more to find.
Thank you, John. And yes, I do. I did find this that spectrum that you talked about, you know, growth. I mean, I don't know the exact terms, but you know, it's rare that in a report about digitality and education and, you know, and technology, that one finds the word collapse. And I think that speaks to the world we live in today, that those issues have really come to the forefront, speaking about climate change, for instance, as Aras said as well.
Yeah. So there's a question there, you know, that comes to my mind. What if the next pandemic is digital? You know, we've all run to digital technology to save us and to remain connected. But you know, what if we all of a sudden we find ourselves in this massive cyber warfare and systems collapsing everywhere around us? It's possible. It's plausible.
Absolutely. And I know Chris has been patiently waiting. So Chris, let me let you follow up from there.
Let me add one connection real quick. If people watch last week's show, it'll connect to this week's show because Julie Salmon mentioned 4 possible scenarios as well. And so if you go to the Horizons Report, page 31, if you're watching this a couple months from now, you're incorporating this in your class, have people read pages 31 to 35 and then watch Julie Salmon and her video about this. Maybe they might do a comparison. I also want to make a comment. Thanks, Aras, for coming in on your vacation. I'm glad that the technology worked. We were a little worried about that. So, you know, Chris, jump in.
So I want to broaden this a bit. When we started Silver Lining for Learning in March 2020, one of our motives was that all of us agreed this was the largest opportunity to change what was going on in higher education that we had seen in our lifetimes. And one of the questions that has pervaded a lot of the episodes of the show is what has changed, what hasn't changed, and how much of it will remain when I don't think anyone now says go back to normal, because it's clear that we're not going to go back to normal, but go to something that's stable, some stable state that hopefully we can get to in a year or two or three. So I'll illustrate this with my own School of Education at Harvard University. The School of Education, by directive from Harvard Central, in its 100 years, had never offered an online course for credit. And suddenly, within the period of a week, every course was online. So Harvard was arguably the least prepared university in the world to do online learning, other than its division of continuing education. And now there's an approved online master's degree at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I wish I could have gotten a bet down in Las Vegas, you know, in early 2020 of the odds that that would happen. I could retire on the proceeds from a bet like that. So that's a kind of change that has occurred that I don't think will disappear. On the other hand, I would describe the quality of the online courses that are being offered as extremely variable. And I would describe the university's ability to assess the quality of those online courses as very low. So kind of everything is being celebrated. If you're capable of teaching online at all, it's a cause for celebration. Well, of course, those of us who've been doing distance education for a long time, not so much. And so it seems early to proclaim that all of this change is good. So I just wanted to ask each of you what has happened, if anything, in the last year that you thought you would not see in your professional lifetimes in your region or country? And what, if anything, that's good do you think may still be around 3 years from now?
I'm happy to jump in on that one, Chris. Thanks for that. You know, I think what's different about this period is that the scale of the challenge, the scale of the disruption, and while it is true on the one hand that the new normal is that for those countries and places of privilege where we have got digital infrastructure and we can learn online fairly easily. Yes, I think that's a transformation that will probably be sustained. But I think there's so much other turbulence going on and disruption to the sector, and in particular in my country. I'm sure it's the same elsewhere, but international students have been the lifeblood of the sector over the last couple of decades. We've had huge numbers of international students participating within our system, and all of a sudden that's just stopped. Now, of course, we can argue that perhaps a lot more offshore online learning will be taking place from now on. We don't know, and we don't know how long this pandemic is going to continue. We're all anticipating maybe the next 6 months, maybe the next year it'll all be over. But these variants keep on coming, and so you know, your core question there, I've not seen anything like it. I never thought I would witness a global challenge quite like this. Of course, I've always had anxiety about a nuclear war or some other kind of disaster happening in my lifetime, but this was totally unanticipated.
Laura, you got a comment on that?
On the question, yeah. I mean, the two things that have kind of gone, it's like, what can we catch that went right? Because I think that's what you're asking. And I think the one thing is an ironic one, but the attention that has been paid to inequality, one would hope that now that it has become visible, it will not become invisible again. So hopefully once we have seen it, we can't unsee it. So that's kind of like a bit of a backhanded thing, but one would hope that this is not a passing phase, and that we would like to see that invested in and really infiltrate regulations and systems and practices and pedagogy and so on. So that's the one thing one would really like to see become mainstream and not even be an issue next time we have a pandemic. And then the second thing I would like to see become entrenched is the collaboration that we've seen. And really it's been collaboration despite rather than because there's been collaboration at sort of micro, meso and macro levels. So first of all, universities are set up through these ranking systems to be competitive. Global universities, research intensive universities like my own, competition is the name of the game and individualism is the name of the game. And despite what's happened, there's been collaboration. There's been collaboration across nations. You know, if you look at the Commonwealth of Learnings, I forget what it's called something like Open Door. There were, I forget how many institutions and countries involved. It's a really big number where courses were shared. There's been collaboration across disciplines. There's been collaboration across universities, but in terms of academic development processes and academic learning. And there's also been some interesting collaboration. So if you look at the kind of theoretical basis of the work that we do, you've had educational technology in this theoretical box, and you've had academic development in this other theoretical box, and you've had educational research in another another theoretical box, and there the twain shall meet. And you know how I always think of Life of Brian, you know, the smaller it gets, the more niched it gets, the more people argue with each other. And I think during this period, we've actually seen people turn to one another and draw on each other's theoretical resources. And one would really like to see that continue. So that's what I would hope for.
Aras, you gonna take a crack at it?
Yep. There are a lot of things, you know, when I compare the year before pandemic and after pandemic, but I just want to share it's funny and ironic thing, you know. I have MA and PhD at distance education as a field. I am an associate professor of distance education. And I never call myself as an expert in the field because I believe there are a lot to explore and I'm still learning. On the other hand, upon the popularity of online distance education, I've seen a lot of experts all around me, and they were lecturing about how to design distance education courses, how to use best practices, blah, blah. I think this is ironic, but this is also problematic. And there was a paper about by Chuck Hodge and some other friends, and also wrote a paper with Ramesh Sharma. The thing we implemented last year, it was not online distance education. It was actually emergency remote education, and there are a lot of differences. Maybe we have to remember that, and I always worry about that. And I know, you know, all of you wrote about online learning and distance education for many years. And I mean, we advanced the field, but because of those bad practices and imitation of face-to-face instruction through online async lectures, I think it will harm the real online distance education, and this is also associated with the quality concerns. And maybe, you know, our biggest concern should be that another thing, for many years, I always believed that social network can be used in educational processes, and they have a lot of potential. And I've seen that social media and social media tools were really useful, and they were free, and people managed to form communities or practices. They shared their experiences, they shared information, and this was great. Yes, pandemic was an unfortunate event, but I think it taught a lot of things to us. When it comes to the earlier discussions, we were, you know, talking about why openness don't draw a lot of attention. You know, if you just check a few prominent distance education journals, you will see a lot of articles on learning management systems. I mean, the ones that for profit. I think, you know, venture capitalist tech companies are also shaping the field, pushing us to think the otherwise. But in practice, we see that we don't really need these learning management systems or similar infrastructures. And we can, again, do the same thing, manage what we try to accomplish by using open and free services.
I've invited Yong to come back in here and see if he has a comment or a question, since he's working on that book. It might relate. If you look at the report itself, there are 6 odd areas that are emphasized in this year, and we've already talked about one of them. The repeated theme, as Laura said, it's coming in over and over and over. You kind of got to wonder, you know, what is the uptake and what are the issues in terms of training or in terms of awareness or support or infrastructure or administration, modeling of open ed. But there's 5 other areas that are in the report: artificial intelligence, blended and hybrid course models. Of course, blended and hybrid's in and out of favor over the last 20 years. And we had Brian Beatty in a few weeks ago, or 2 months ago, on the high flex model. Learning analytics, and we'll have Chuck Zubin and Patsy Moskow next week talk about that from Central Florida. Micro-credentialing and quality online learning. Of these other 5 areas, does anyone want to discuss or talk about or address one of the 5 other areas that are in the report, and maybe what you're working on? Are any of you exploring any of these 6 different areas or 5 different areas, and you might want to talk about your scholarship and what you're doing in one of these respective areas? I think Aras is into artificial intelligence, I know, and you're doing learning analytics and data mining in a big way. I'm reading all your reports and my brain's going numb looking at all that data you're analyzing there. Does anyone want to jump in and talk about the other areas of the report?
I can jump in.
Go ahead.
Actually, you know, before this meeting, I was thinking if one of you would ask, you know, which one of the trends are most important for us, you know.
That's what I was doing here. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear.
Okay.
Yes,
Right.
that's what I asked.
And I was just checking, remembering the trends, and this depends on the perspective, the angle you have. But to me, I think AI is a trending topic, and with my PhD students, I work on the use of AI in online distance education. But one of my PhD students, he's a technical guy, and we are trying to design an expert system that will provide meaningful learning paths. On the other hand, with my other PhD student, we will work on the ethics. It's really important. It was also an issue that I reflected in Turkish higher implication section. I mean, yes, AI is powerful, but really few people talk about the ethics, and it's really important. Another thing would be, I think, openness. Oh yeah, yes, probably, some trends will emerge again in the next years, and these will be probably issues related to the openness and educational technology. And in terms of educational technology, AI is a big candidate. I also briefly note that there are a lot of criticism about AI, but Marshall, there is a famous saying of the Marshall McLuhan: "We create technology, and in turns, it recreates us." Based on McLuhan's ideas, what we criticize is actually we at the end. I mean, we design AI. It's not something emerging by itself. We design, we model it, and it tries to replicate us. So if we criticize the AI, if we blame it for many things, I think what we blame is not the AI, but the humans themselves.
John or Laura, you want to jump in? Go ahead, Young. You have a question?
Well, no, I just want to jump in and comment on this. This is, since you ask me, now you can't get rid of me. Okay, you asked me to come back. I was hiding behind, but anyway, the comment is this, and also it's a question. So think about this, okay, EDUCAUSE is a technology group. So EDUCAUSE is fundamentally a technology group, and naturally it explores how technology might affect education in the long run. So we think about that, we agree with that. My question is more this, actually, is given the pandemic, is that, higher education is always local in many ways, even though it has a lot of international students. So it carries a long tradition of culture. Chris, again, I always kind of make fun of Harvard. Look at Harvard. When people go to Harvard, they're not educating an international group. They may claim they're educating a Harvard. But if you become Harvard, becomes truly a global education, then you lose the culture, then there's no Harvard. So every university has a strong culture things. Now, if pandemic give the students distributed, so for example, again, Curt or Punya, Arizona University or whatever you are. So if you're offering a program with students from different countries, so culturally they are in their local culture, but they're taking this course. I'm sure there are courses that's kind of no culture, but actually I doubt, every professor carries cultures, you have different traditions. So I was just really wondering, can we have global universities? I'm very curious about that. Can we have global universities? And because I'm very worried about students in developing countries who do not have access to a higher education. But then what do you mean by having access to a higher education? So I would love to see how you guys react to that question. And I'm sure EDUCAUSE might invite me next time to talk about, horizon report with culture, horizon report with the heart. So go ahead.
Laura's smiling, so I'm sure she's John.
Oh, okay. So I'm jumping in. It looks like the conversation could go in lots of different directions here. So there's a few key words that provoke me, Yong, from your commentary and question. And when I think about global, I'm doing a little bit of research at the moment about the counterpoint to global as well, and looking at something that I'm describing with my colleagues as local wisdom. And it's what we do around here, what we've known how to do well in this place, in this region. So to the question of is a truly global university possible? Of course it is, but the dimensions of what constitute that global descriptor are going to be very, very important. And so you know, we know that globalization has been contested all around the world and has been for decades as well. So I think we're going to nuance that word over time. And so, gee, there's a few other things that I'd written down about the other dimensions, Curt, the other topics within the Horizon report, etc. But so one of them, another one that's speaking to me quite strongly is the sustainability issue that really UNESCO put up there, put on the table some years ago. I think it's got new attention. We're needing to recalibrate where we are, recalibrate our systems and protocols and what we're doing in higher education, and that's an opportunity, I think, to perhaps deliver on a more equitable result in our world. So there's a couple of thoughts, but in terms of the technology focus of EDUCAUSE and the Horizon report that underlies the Horizon report, I've also got a summary kind of history of the digital infrastructure of the internet, and I tend to talk in terms of search, social, and smart. And we've got these three pivotal kinds of technologies that have really shaped the trajectories of the internet and the web. And in the early days with each of them, we get excited and we tend to go for the positive narrative. But if you dig into search, you will know that search is like hide and seek. You know, there's a lot of hidden stuff going on with internet technologies and the dark web and all of that. And when we look at the social side of things, yes, we've got community and community building. That's a wonderful thing. But on the other side of it, we've got all these echo chambers and tribal cultures emerging within social media. And, you know, they're possibly the root cause, arguably the root cause of all the misinformation that's being propagated. And so we're on this precipice with all these technologies, not just AI, but the whole, you know, so-called fourth industrial revolution, Internet of Things, etc. We're on this precipice of change, and yes, we've got so much smart potential there, but we've got stupidity to choose as well, and we may yet choose that. And so I'm really interested in all of that. You know, that broader picture and the broader challenge here as we navigate all these frontiers.
Laura, I'll have you jump in here, and then I'm going to have you all do a 1-minute overview of what you're currently working on that might excite the audience to read up on each of you as an ending question. So prepare for that, Laura.
So I'm going back to your question about which of these other issues that were mentioned in the Horizon report. And it's interesting that blended and online are there, and we're all treating them as if they're either an automatic good or possibly neutral. Okay, the world is post-digital, and now higher education is also fully digital. And actually, I think that needs to be seriously problematized, because, you know, before the pandemic, Zuboff was talking about surveillance capitalism, and she wasn't the first, but she did a great job of bringing it all together in a really coherent way. And I would argue that what we've seen through blended and online learning is the intense, speedy, and immediate datification of higher education. And that's actually really scary in terms of its implications. And if you go back to the original point, we were talking about how the inequality has been surfaced during this period. it's really scary for particular people and for particular groups of people, because if you start thinking about who's most likely to be exploited through the datafication of higher education, you start seeing another layer of concern. And obviously it goes way beyond privacy laws around content, as you all know. It's about what she calls digital exhaust, about metadata. It's about all those other things that we are simply not paying attention to right now. Not because I honestly think people, you know, the one thing we haven't said here is that we're talking at a moment of deep exhaustion.
Yeah.
And the sector and everyone in it is deeply exhausted. And so there's a real scary moment where the systems, where the whole sector globally has become datafied in this extraordinary experiment. And we haven't had time to pay attention to it. So if there's one thing I'd really like to see going forward is how do we pay attention to it?
I just have a quick comment, Laura. I think the point that you made about how quickly the datafication has happened, I think, I mean, and you speak about higher ed, and what I'm saying is that now, if you are above 5 years of age and you did some kind of online schooling, a data stream on you has been created. So the world that our children will grow up in is one where, I mean, that was already happening, but in some ways we were doing it, posting their pictures on Facebook and, you know, whatever. But now, and if you look at the news coming out of this Pegasus software and so on, I mean, you can now identify people down precisely. I mean, one of the things in the pre-digital age was the sort of the anonymity of the crowd. And I think what people really haven't grasped that is that there can be a precise sort of monitoring of an individual if need be for whatever nefarious or good purposes, right? And
Exactly.
I don't think we have really explored the implications of that. And it's one of those runaway trains that is often it's on, right? It's on the tracks.
It's gone.
It's gone.
And
I think
if you look at Google Classroom, that's gone into all the schools, not so
Exactly.
much in higher education. Everyone thinks it's contained, but it's an entire ecosystem.
No, it's not. It is not. It's absolutely not. And I think that's just fascinating, you know. And if you look at, like Zoom right now will give you a transcript. So, you know, we think speech is something that cannot be easily searchable and digitized. Guess what? It's all, it's all bits and bytes. And once they become bits and bytes, they're trackable, traceable, collectible, manipulable. And there are huge benefits that can come from it. Don't get me wrong. Coming back to the point John was making. But I think that the ethical and moral issues around this are some things that we have not really jumped into. And I think there's a lot here, and very little of it is in our control. I think that's the other interesting part of that. Anyway, thank you for that comment.
So we've got a couple minutes left, and before we introduce the next show, but just 2 minutes are left. So if each of you could give us your 30-second overview, 45-second overview of what you're working on now in terms of your scholarship, your individual scholarship, in case people watching the show want to catch up with you or write to you after the show. Could we go through that? Maybe start with John.
Okay, so thanks, Curt. Very quickly, I'll use some key words. Questioning, student questioning. I'm interested in the explanatory as opposed to the informational. Where the web is a huge informational space that draws on data, and I'm interested in the explanatory side of things, and question formulation and sense making is the other key word there. Thanks.
And we had a previous show with Paul Kim from Stanford talking about just that, questioning. I'll send you the link to that show, John. And we did have the Commonwealth of Learning on, I think it's show number 3 that Laura talked about. So we do have a link there as well. Laura?
Higher education for good. That's my project, and that's what I really want to pay attention to, so that these kinds of issues get explored, understood, narrated, imagined, speculated, etc. Higher education for the good.
Thank you, Laura. Aras?
My answer will be too broad. I actually work on digitalization, digital education, but as I mentioned earlier, not only hard technologies, but also soft technologies. I mean, I always try to merge these two things. And as a final comment, I just want to say, looking back the earlier minutes, I see that, there was a saying from literature courses, every society creates its own monster. What I see, we create our monsters, then we start to fight with it, then we discuss it, and we create another monster. I think our general problem in higher education, we never learn from our past. We repeat the same mistakes again and again.
Thank you, Aras. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, John. It's been fascinating having you with us today and talking about the report from the Horizon report from EDUCAUSE. And we look forward to your continued scholarship in the field. And hopefully we can catch up with you again down the road in Turkey, in South Africa, in Darwin, or somewhere else in the world at a conference. It's time, though, to introduce episode 69. That blog post will go up probably pretty quickly after the show ends, because it's ready to rock and roll. The title of that show is Untangling Adaptive Learning on the Way to Tangelo Park. And there's a subtitle, Taking a Road Trip to Central Florida, because that's where we're going. The University of Central Florida, the largest university in Florida. We'll have Charles Zubin with us, who's been working there for over 50 years. He started when the university started, was the smallest university. It's now the largest one. Along with Patsy Moskal, his partner in crime, who's now the director of the Research and Teaching Effectiveness Center. So the two of them are doing research on online learning, blended learning, learning analytics, and adaptive learning. And they'll talk about 3 books of research on blended, the new one just about to come out. They have another book they're working on learning analytics and adaptive learning now. And they also are known for teaching and training in online learning. People used to take busloads to go visit Central Florida to see how you can train professors how to teach online. And that was 20 years ago. So they are way ahead of everyone else. And that's why they are now the largest university in the country, maybe the second largest in the country, largest in Florida. They're being able to use their spaces effectively in Central Florida because they don't get the money to build new buildings. They're using blended. So they'll also talk about Tangelo Park, an inner city project for kids in Florida, in Central Florida, where we have a large success rate in getting young kids to go to college who previously wouldn't have.